They thought she didn't belong. The billionaire's family laughed at his black wife, mocking her dress, her voice, her very existence at their golden table. They invited her to speak, expecting shame. But when she took the stage, her words left them trembling and speechless. Before we dive in, drop in the comments where in the world are you watching this from? And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this prove that courage can change everything. The grand chandelier burned bright above the hall, but beneath its glow, one woman sat drowning in shadows, not of her making. She was the billionaire's wife, elegant, poised, her skin glowing deep bronze against the pale marble walls. Yet in that room, she was never simply a wife. She was a target. From the moment she stepped through the doors, the whispers began. Look at her dress. It looks borrowed. Did you see the way she walks? Not like one of us. Money can buy her a seat at this table, but not class. Each remark floated across the hall like venom dressed in silk. And when the first cousin chuckled, the others followed, laughter rolling down the table like a cruel tide. They didn't care that she heard. In fact, they wanted her. She raised her glass slowly, hoping her trembling hand would not betray her. But the aunt seated across leaned in with a smirk. You know, dear, this family has always had standards. We've never mixed before. The word mixed slipped from her lips like poisoned sugar, and the others snickered, hiding their cruelty behind napkins and champagne. Her husband shifted uncomfortably beside her, but he said nothing. He, the titan of business, feared rocking the fragile pride of his bloodline, and so she sat alone in her silence, their laughter scraping against her dignity like sandpaper against glass. Another cousin, too young to know restraint, too arrogant to care, leaned toward his brother and whispered loud enough for half the table to hear. She probably married him for the money. Who wouldn't? The table erupted again, cruel chuckles masked as family humor. Her ears burned, but she did not bow her head. Inside her chest, her heart thundered. Each insult was a match striking against stone, and soon sparks gathered, waiting for breath to become flame. But the family wasn't done. Oh, I hear she used to work before, one woman said with mock astonishment, raising her brows. Imagine a working girl at this table. Don't be cruel, another replied sweetly, though her smile betrayed her malice. She's trying, bless her hearts. Though tell me, do they even teach table manners where she's from? The laughter that followed was louder this time. No violins could soften it. No crystal could disguise it. The room had become a theater, and she was the enter. She sat still, every muscle in her body taut, every breath measured. On the outside, she was calm. But inside she was carving every word into memory. And as the patriarch lifted his fork and tapped it against his glass, the hall fell silent. Well then, he said, his voice heavy with mockery, why don't we give our guest of honor's wife a chance to speak? The family grinned. They thought the show was about to begin. But what they didn't know was this. The woman they had spent the night degrading was about to rise, and when she did, she would leave them trembling. The silence that followed the patriarch's announcement didn't last long. It broke like fragile glass under the weight of smothered laughter. One by one, the family members leaned closer, trading remarks behind jeweled fingers and half-raised glasses. She can't possibly speak to us, muttered an uncle, his voice dripping with disdain. Let her try. Another replied, amusement glittering in her eye. It will be entertaining. The black wife felt every word land on her skin like burning coals. She knew they weren't whispering quietly enough to keep her from hearing. That was the point. They wanted the humiliation to settle deep, wanted to see if she'd flinch. Her husband shifted again, his hand brushing hers under the table, but still he said nothing. His silence was its own betrayal, a wound she could not show. And so, she sat with her back straight, her eyes steady, even as the storm of ridicule grew louder. One of the younger cousins, emboldened by wine, leaned back in his chair and said aloud, "Why don't we ask her to recite something from her community? I'm sure it will be exotic." The table erupted with laughter, sharp, cruel, endless, a symphony of mockery, echoing against marble walls. She clenched her jaw, her mind screamed, her heart raced, but outwardly she gave them nothing. She knew one wrong move, one crack in her dignity, and they would devour her whole. Then came another blow, this one wrapped in velvet malice. "You know," said the matriarch, her pearls shining against her wrinkled throat, "our women have always been known for grace, for charm, for bloodlines. I do hope you can live up to that." Her words lingered like smoke, thick and suffocating. The family nodded in agreement, their pride swelling like a tide that threatened to drown her. And still she sat. But the humiliation wasn't finished. Not yet. As the patriarch raised his glass again, someone at the far end muttered, "Careful, if she speaks too long, we might need a translator." The laughter returned, this time louder, more vicious, as if the cruelty had unlocked a shared hunger in them all. They laughed not because the words were clever, but because cruelty is addictive when it finds a willing audience. Her eyes flicked around the hall. Every face glowed in the chandelier's light, but none shone with kindness. Every smirk seemed carved deeper, every chuckle sharper. She felt her body grow heavier, as if the air itself wanted to crush her. Yet at the same time, something inside her began to rise, a heat, a fire, a strength that no laughter could extinguish. For while they whispered, she remembered. She remembered the nights she had spent working two jobs, building her own name before she ever met him. She remembered the people who had doubted her all her life, the doors slammed in her face, the voices that said no, until she made them say yes. She had been underestimated before, and every time she had risen higher. Her lips curved slightly, not in a smile but in the quiet recognition of what was about to happen. They thought this night would break her, but they had just handed her the stage. The patriarch's voice carried through the banquet hall like a whip. "Why don't we hear from her?" Forks clattered onto plates. Glasses paused midair. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, hungry, waiting for the spectacle they thought was guaranteed. This was it. The moment the billionaire's black wife would stumble, stammer, prove herself unworthy of the gold-gilded world she had married into. A hush fell, but it wasn't respect. It was anticipation. They leaned in, smirking, already rehearsing the laughter that would follow her failure. Her chair scraped softly against the marble floor. As she rose, every second stretched long and taut, like a rope pulled to breaking. Her husband half stood, uncertain, but she placed a hand on his arm, firm and calm. She would not be shielded. Not tonight. She walked slowly toward the small stage at the far end of the hall. The chandeliers caught the shimmer of her gown with every step, but her shadow seemed larger than her figure, stretching across the room as if it had grown wings. The whispers began again. "Look, she's shaking. She won't last 2 minutes. She's about to embarrass him." But when she reached the podium, she did not falter. Her hands did not tremble. Her eyes, dark, steady, unflinching, swept across the hall and pinned the family where they sat. Silence thickened, the kind that presses against skin, that makes people hold their breath without realizing. And then, she spoke. Her voice was low at first, but clear, each word slicing through the smug air like a blade through silk. "You've judged me since the moment I walked into this room. You've measured my worth by the color of my skin, the cut of my dress, the shape of my past. But let me tell you something. Her voice rose, stronger now, gathering the weight of her truth. Every insult you've thrown, I've heard before. Every whisper you've traded, I've lived through 1,000 times. And every time, every single time, I have walked through it stronger than before. Gasps rippled. The violinist's bow stilled mid-string. For the first time that night, the family's laughter died without command. She continued, her words flowing like fire and water at once. Fierce enough to burn, steady enough to cleanse. She spoke of the struggles she had faced long before she ever met her husband, of the dignity she had carried through years of being underestimated. She spoke not as a wife defending her place, but as a woman claiming it. The twist no one had seen coming was unfolding before their eyes. She was not their entertainment, she was their reckoning. As her words settled into the air, heavy and undeniable, something shifted in the room. The smirks faded, the prideful eyes lowered. Even the patriarch, who had set the trap with his mocking invitation, sat frozen, his glass forgotten in his hand. And her husband, the billionaire, the man who had built empires, looked at her with something beyond love, beyond pride. He looked at her as if he too was seeing her for the very first time. What they had thought would be her humiliation had become their silence. What they expected to break her had become the moment she rose taller than them all. Her first words had shaken the room, but what followed would shatter it. She did not look down at her notes. She had none. She didn't fumble, didn't hesitate. She simply spoke, and with every sentence her voice grew stronger, taller, larger than the chandeliered hall itself. You laugh at me, she said, her gaze moving from face to face, because you think I don't belong. But belonging isn't about skin.
Ben,
It isn't about bloodlines or the cut of your diamonds. Belonging is about heart, about the courage to stand even when the world tells you to sit. Her words hung heavy. No one dared move. She turned slightly, her eyes landing on the aunt who had questioned her manners. You talk of grace, she continued, her tone sharp yet steady. But tell me, what grace is there in cruel? What grace is there in mocking a woman at your table? You think dignity is inherited, but dignity is chosen, and tonight you've shown none. The aunt dropped her gaze, her pearls trembling against her collarbone. Then she shifted to the cousins, who had whispered about her community. Her eyes didn't waver. You call me an outsider. You call me different. And yes, I am different. Different because I've known struggle. Different because I've worked for every inch of respect I carry. Different because I have endured storms you cannot imagine. And I'll tell you this. What you call different, I call strength. A murmur rippled through the hall, not of mockery but of unease. Her words had weight, and the family felt it pressing down on them like stone. The patriarch shifted in his chair, his smirk fading, but she wasn't finished. She stepped closer to the edge of the stage, her presence commanding, her fire undeniable. You tried to make me small, she said, her voice rising, resonant, but the truth is, your laughter made me taller, your whispers made me stronger, and your cruel, it only proved what I already knew, that I don't need your approval to belong. I belong because I know my worth. Now the silence was absolute. The servants at the edge of the hall froze mid-step. The violinist lowered his bow completely. Even the chandeliers seemed to burn brighter, as though they themselves bent to her voice. And then she did what no one expected. She told her story. She spoke of her childhood, of nights where hunger gnawed at her but dreams kept her alive. She spoke of working 2 jobs, of enduring the sting of doors slammed in her face, of the voices that had told her she was not good enough, not worthy enough, not the right kind. And she told them how she had risen anyway, how she had built herself with grit, with love, with unshakable belief. I didn't marry him to escape who I am, she said, turning toward her husband at last. I married him because I know my worth. And he saw it too, and if you cannot see it, then it is your blindness, not my failure. The billionaire's eyes glistened, pride and awe mingling in his gaze. But the family who had mocked, ridiculed, humiliated, sat in stunned silence, their arrogance cracked wide open. For the first time they were not looking at her skin, not at her gown, not at her place at the table. They were looking at her, a woman whose voice had drowned out generations of prejudice in a single night, and they had no choice but to listen. When her last words echoed into stillness, the hall felt like it was holding its breath. No glass clinked, no whispers stirred, no cruel laughter broke the air. It was as if the very walls had been shamed into silence. The same family that had mocked her, who had called her unworthy, who had laughed at her accent, her skin, her presence, now stared at her with wide, unblinking eyes. Their smirks had dissolved into shame. Their pride had melted into unease. For the first time that night, they weren't looking at the outsider. They were looking at a woman who had stood alone against an empire of arrogance and won. Her husband rose slowly to his feet, his eyes never leaving her. The billionaire who had built fortunes, who had silenced rivals in boardrooms, stood in awe of the strength beside him. His applause came first, slow, steady, reverberating through the hall. Clap, clap, clap. And then against their own will, others followed. One pair of hands, then another, a cascade of applause, uneven and hesitant at first, but swelling until the golden room thundered with the sound of respect. Not everyone clapped. Some lowered their eyes, their shame too raw to face her, but none dared laugh again. She stood tall, her hands resting lightly on the podium, her heart steady now. She didn't smile triumphantly, didn't gloat. She had not spoken to humiliate them. She had spoken to remind them that dignity is not given. It is the patriarch, who had set the trap, remained seated, his jaw clenched tight, his glass of wine trembled in his grip, not from weakness, but from the realization that his weapon had backfired. What he had intended as her downfall had instead become her coronation. When she stepped down from the stage, the family parted like water, their gazes dropping as she passed. Some whispered apologies under their breath, some couldn't find words at all. Her husband took her hand, kissed it softly, and in that moment, the entire room saw what they had refused to see before. She wasn't the woman who had married into wealth. She was the woman who brought strength to. And as they walked together toward the exit, the chandeliers blazing above, one truth remained, etched forever into the memory of that night. They had laughed at her, they had degraded her, they had tried to break her, but in the end, it was she who left them speechless. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not anger, not shouting, not even fighting back. It is rising so high in your truth that laughter dies in its own echo.